extremely pleased to welcome you to this roundtable discussion, and we're excited to sharing this time with you to discuss that very important topic of teaching the composer of tomorrow. For those who are watching, everyone on this panel is extremely accomplished and respected in the field. I would like to introduce briefly our panelists: Elinor Armer, Mason Bates, Taurin Barrera, David Conte, Jacques Desjardins, David Garner, Mauricio Rodriguez, Arkadi Serper, Joseph Stillwell, Dmitri Tymoczko, again, thank you very much for joining us, Daniel Wood, and our beloved Dean of San Francisco Conservatory of Music, Mr. Jonas Wright. We have 3 jumping off points in the form of 3 questions, and our panelists will answer them as well as they will answer your questions. All the panelists are on San Francisco Conservatory of Music faculty, but we also have a distinguished guest with us, Dr. Dmitri Tymoczko, who is on the faculty, as you know, of Princeton University. However, Dr. Tymoczko has close ties with SFCM, and one of the ties is that he is a teacher of our Associate Dean of Academic Affairs and Chair of Professional Development Department, Mr. Ryan Brown. And I would like to offer opening remarks to Dr. Dmitri Tymoczko, please.
Okay, I didn't prepare any extended or complicated remarks. I have thought all of my life about how we should teach young musicians, and it is a topic that's very important to me. And I would say that right now, I think that we face 2 opposing imperatives. And one is the imperative of diversification, of opening up our educational system to a wide range of different kinds of music and approaches to making music. For me, rock music, popular music, electronic music, jazz, folk music, musics from other cultures, non-Western musics, these are incredibly important ways of making music. And we need to find a way of building them into our curricula. When I was educated, it was all about Bach to Brahms with maybe some Schoenberg. And that is obviously not acceptable in the 21st century. So the imperative of diversification stands on one side. On the other side stands the imperative of conservation. So I'm someone who believes that the music of Monteverdi and of Bach and of Grieg and of Mahler, this is incredibly important music. And some of this music is extraordinarily sophisticated and important. And so one of the functions of a conservatory or a university is to make sure that music doesn't die out and get destroyed by market forces that might push us toward less fragile and less complex forms of music. So figuring out how to balance these 2 concepts, these 2 imperatives is very, very important. I have some ideas about how to do it. And I think in some ways our problem is really a conceptual problem, which is that we don't understand music generally enough to be able to see how these different approaches to making music really are related. And that a lot of our problems have to do with the embodied way in which music is taught. We learn one specific style and we transmit that style and the habits that make up that style, not in a philosophical way, but in a practical way. And so I'm hopeful that if we deepen our theoretical understanding of how music is made, we can find ourselves in a place where we can sort of see all these different kinds of music making as more continuous than we have seen them in the past. So I think that's all I want to say to start. I'm more interested in hearing from other people than in talking myself.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tymoczko. And we're going to start with the first question, which sounds like this. What methods do you employ to tap into the creativity of the mind of a young composer? And I would like to ask Elinor Armer to start the discussion. Thank you.
I like to take the approach that I am trying to draw something out of the student rather than putting something into him or her. I like to be very personal with them. This takes patience and empathy. I start by, if this is a one-on-one situation, I start by asking them what they want to compose, what they're interested in, why they are there. I ask them what kinds of music they like, and I encourage them to study other pieces by composers that they like, and to use those as models, always taking it from a personal point of view. I like to honor the needs and the tastes and the experience of each student. So initially, I like to look at their work that they have already done and submitted, if you will, and make positive observations and ask them questions about it and so on, and to draw them in to what is obviously a very personal exchange between the two of us. This is about all I can say at the moment as far as how to begin working with a student and to tap into their creativity. One needs to have a very positive approach, and don't begin with rules or rules against things. Do not begin with prohibitions.
Okay, thank you very much, Ellie. David Conte would, current chair of our department, and Ellie is the founder of the department. So, David, would you mind, please?
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you all, and especially with Professor Armer, with whom I've taught for almost 40 years. And if you didn't know, she's taught over 50 years at the Conservatory. I think the composers are born and then made. And so the first task is to discover what kind of intuitive gift they have, and that whatever they're composing is a direct reflection of their musicianship. And how to evaluate musicianship in this time, because of the impact of technology and changes in the culture, is a great challenge. To give a simple example, the impulses of electricity, meaning if we enter music using the computer and we push a button and it plays it back to us, if one isn't very careful, has come to replace the breath span, the sense of memory that composers always developed quite naturally for centuries based on what music they knew and what music they'd internalized in their own bodies. And then maybe just to say one more point, music exists in 3 dimensions unless a person wants just to write Gregorian chant. So the composer, again, this is assuming they have a creative impulse, which not everyone has, but it doesn't mean even if one doesn't have a creative impulse, they can still benefit a great deal by learning the discipline of composition. I've yet to see a replacement for the piano and the organ, meaning that playing the piano and playing the organ for a composer requires them to experience music in 3 dimensions and to experience rhythmic counterpoint with their own bodies in such a way that whatever they're inventing is an authentic expression of what they truly hear and feel and know. And again, because of technology, and I think this is kind of idée fixe with me, we have a lot of composers today who are at the effect of technology instead of being at cause with their technology. And so I would say that right at the outset with a young composer, I'm looking to find out what kind of musician are they and how can I help them become a better musician. And the extent to which they become a deeper, more flexible musician is going to influence the quality of the music they write.
I see. Well, thank you very much, David. And
Thank you.
David Garner, please.
Good
You know,
morning, everyone. As with many of these roundtables, the farther down the list you go answering questions, the less you have to say and the more you agree with your colleagues. So I'm going to say, yeah, what they said, and add my own 2 cents to that. I find it useful to have my new students bring examples of music that they have been listening to that's not their own, regardless of what style or field it would be in. As Dmitri and I both are apparently old rockers, we do come from that area as well. And so if my students have played rock and roll or played blues or jazz or something along those lines, then they bring those examples to me. And we talk about what makes that dynamic and what they find in themselves that resonates with that. And we take it from there. So I actually, by having them tell me what they like, I understand where they're coming from in their creativity, and I can spark that more than if I simply put an overlay of cacciatore and toccatas and things on their piano skills. That's it for me.
Thank you very much, David. Mason, if you don't mind continuing.
It's great to be part of this, and honestly, after those 3 master teachers, I'm not sure how much I can add. I will say that David Conte mentioned this element of technology, which is such an interesting double-edged sword these days. Before we get to that, I totally agree with what several of my colleagues said about looking at some models musically. That could be anything from cacciatore to hey, I would like you to transcribe some hip hop beats or drum and bass rhythms for percussion ensemble. And in that process, you're going to learn a lot more about that music than you would just listening to it. So yeah, I mean, taking kind of specific little composition assignments from very different genre, I think is number one. The other thing about technology is that it's kind of here to stay, and we have to figure out how to deal with it. And I think every composition teacher has to interact with MIDI in some way. MIDI allows everybody to hear what they're writing played back to them. And so one of the things that I've had to deal with is talking to a student about what they've midified up in their computer, and trying to figure out, is that really represented in the notes that you're putting on the page? So one specific technique that is not maybe as interesting as something that Nadia Boulanger would come up with, but is kind of relevant to the current times is, okay, you've created this really exciting, highly precise synthetic score in MIDI, and let's really make sure that what you've created in your studio is represented on the page. And that then translates into very old compositional, orchestrational techniques about balance, about, a lot of times when people write things in a MIDI environment, they're hearing these kind of perfect samples that are very clear. They might not be actually realizing that when they notate it on the page. A big thing I often mention to my students is this, it almost sounds like a kind of Dada-esque piece of advice, themify the theme. This is something that can come in a very useful in a very micro way. Like if you're writing a theme, is it a theme? Or you got this noodling bunch of notes here. It looks like you want that to be a theme. If that's supposed to be a theme, let's really make it a theme. But it can also be something on a kind of macro scale, which basically means identify what you're trying to do and really make sure you're intentional about doing that. So that could be a formal structure. That could be, is this a transition? Is this a new idea? Are you trying to have a kind of a trick ending here? But it really requires a composer to step back, identify what's happening here, what's the intention, and how can you make it best happen? And that again points back towards very old kind of traditional compositional orchestrational techniques. You say, okay, well, here's an example of a theme that noodles around and it becomes a much more clear statement. Look at the manuscripts of Beethoven or whatever. So those are a couple of little things. It can range from old school to kind of how to manage technology in your life. But at the end of the day, you know, looking at a lot of different kinds of music, as everybody's mentioned, and even exemplified by Dmitri's work, I think is really important for composers today.
Thank you very much, Mason. And we have Taurin Barrera with us, who is dealing with that generation of composers for whom technology is their instrument. So Taurin, would you mind to say what's your experience about it?
Yeah, it's incredible because over the last 5 to 10 years, a lot of the tools that composers have been using for the last 20 have become a lot more accessible and democratic. Everything from notation softwares to realistic tools for creating mock-ups to advanced production software. And one of the interesting things that's happening at the SF Conservatory is that these tools are being used in our pre-college. So you have students that are just getting started on their composition journey, learning these tools that are the same ones that are being used inside of studios in Hollywood or, you know, in Abbey Road, the same kind of production software. And so how might this manifest itself down the line while we're giving these students that kind of fundamental conservatory musical education, but at the same time opening up these tools and these new worlds into these rabbit holes into music technology. And you know, working with composers in our program, it's always, I mean, there's so many just absolutely mind-blowing things that you can do with sound, digital audio on a computer. Sometimes it's just a spark that will inspire them to pursue different kind of musical styles, or will kind of give them some ideas that they might apply in their film music or game music. So, you know, I think that a lot of, whether you're writing for classical music or music that's going to be recorded, I think, you know, Dmitri makes a great point that fundamentally that this is all very connected no matter what style you're using, whether you are, you know, producing it in MIDI or in notation software. So, I'm actually really excited to see what happens over the next 10 years and what kinds of new audiences might emerge and new students might emerge having this kind of background, already being quite familiar with the tools that professionals have been using for quite a long time now.
Thank you, Taurin. Well, that's the Pandora box opening, and we do have with us 3 pre-college professors of composition, and they're dealing with beginning composers, not age-wise, but the experience-wise. So some of them are continuing education students, and some of them are extremely young and young children with ideas not generated by the long experience of playing musical instrument and that, but they have that technology fluency. So if Mr. Daniel Wood will start the pre-college part of our conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, I completely agree with Taurin. They have such a wide amount of things at their disposal, and they're 10. They're so young. And it's just, there's this incredible palette that they can take advantage of. So I find with our youngest students, I'm forever trying to remind them not to let the technology drive their creative inspirations. I mean, it's so easy for the defaults that are found in so much of the software out there to kind of drive you into a 4/4, the click equals 100 kind of world, and to say there's so many other places to go. And so from, I think, our perspective in the pre-college, it's very important to foster improvisation with every student, because I mean, many of these students, they're just learning their instruments for the first time. They're getting to know them. They've been immersed in it and learning the works, but starting to look at their work and on their instrument a little bit differently. Like, well, what are all the possibilities I can do with my instrument? What are the possibilities I can do with my friends' instruments when I'm doing stuff with chamber music? And how can improvisation kind of unleash new possibilities that weren't there? And I think that, to David's point, Conte, that is, we feel very, very strongly in the pre-college about tying their instruction to musicianship. And we find when their musicianship is stronger, that when they have a better sense of pulse and a better sense of being able to hear inner lines, they also become much stronger composers as well. So I would say understanding the technology is not, you're not a servant to it. Understanding improvisation is so critical for coming up with those new ideas, and really starting to enhance your musicianship is the way to go for our young composers.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I know we're going over time, but I think at that point we have so wonderful ideas shared with us that we cannot stop the question. We'll rather shrink a little bit. Question number 3, Mauricio, if you will continue Daniel's thoughts.
Yes, I totally agree with what my colleagues have said. So another very important thing for me with small kids is trying to understand what are their interests beyond music too, because that's always, I think that motivates their, musical learning in general, their compositional, basically interests can be, like motivated, expanded if we know about their interests beyond music. So we have kids, as my colleagues have said, I mean, they have now immediate access to computers, to different kinds of information. Like we have kids that are very bright on, mathematics, coding, some other activities that always really can be part of their musical, training and explorations. And this is one of the things that I usually try to look into, trying to understand where that they are coming from, and using those different, like skills that they have to enrich their musical world, right? So then they see the significance, I would say, not just the practical, or the reality aspect of music, in life in general, right? But they basically, if we discuss on disciplines beyond music and their interests, I think that really helps to build up like a larger picture as why they want to be artists, why is that they want to create music, and why or how some other disciplines impact music creation. And that's very important for me.
Thank you very much, Mauricio. It's a really huge topic, and I would like to ask Mr. Jacques Desjardins. Mauricio and Daniel and Arkadi and Joseph, we are all teaching musicianship as well as they're teaching composition. And Jacques is a professor with music theory department, and he does a lot for teaching our students, our college students. So Jacques, what's your thought on that?
Yes, well, my profile is somewhat different compared to my colleagues. Most of you out there, you teach one-on-one, so they come to your studio, and as Ellie said at the top of this discussion, they bring their ideas to you. In my role in the music theory department, students come to me because they want to embrace my curriculum. I teach this class, it's an advanced harmony sequence, and we basically learn how to do a pastiche of a Wagner type or a Schubert type of progression. In the second semester in the 20th century curriculum, they get to do, say, a Shostakovich type of exercise or a Debussy style. So I see my role as expanding their vocabulary. The original question was about how to tap into their creativity. Well, I think the richer your vocabulary is, the more equipped you are to create. And so they come to me because, as Ellie said earlier, they want me to put information in their minds. So they have a craving, a hunger for this canonic repertoire. And it's always a revelation when I see them come. Oh my God, I could do this. Here's my Copland style assignment. So their voice becomes more enriched, and the more vocabulary, the more styles they can master, the more creative they can be. So I think we're all there to help them, and that's how I see my role. So that's my first role. And my second role, I'm the designated conductor of their large ensemble projects. So I get to see their finished product, their finished artifact, and then when they hear it live in the hall, not as a computer rendition, now they see the truth of what it is to actually put the notes on the page and have them revealed. So I can counsel them on notational things that can better express their idea so that it's easier to be played, or some balance issues that they finally hear in the hall. So it's always a very satisfying experience for me pedagogically to be able to complement the work they've done with their composition teacher and to increase their vocabulary, or to have them hear their pieces, because I'm instrumental in having them get that experience as well. So that's part of their complete experience with us.
That's true. Thank you very much, Jacques. But we also have Professor Joseph Stillwell with us, and he's teaching when composers commence to their composition seminar. Well, that is a valuable experience, because they're able to hear what is the process from the beginning before the end. Am I right, Joseph?
Yeah, hi. The process from beginning to end, I'd actually kind of prepared a bit for the third question, and I know we've covered this first question in detail. Do you mind if I actually share a little about that? Or, I guess, and this kind of probably ties into the first question too. I think often about how do we develop the students' complete imagination? That is, how do we help them create an inner experience of the world of tones being as alive and real as the real world? And how can we make connections beyond just all the wonderful things we've been talking about in terms of developing technique, looking at models, all those things, but how can we connect with other disciplines as well, and how can those develop our sense of imagination, especially because music is obviously so abstract. So I think of my own experience. I had an art history minor, and something I really learned from that was how to place art in historical and cultural context, which I think is something we don't always get from our music history experience as much. And in addition, you can start to develop from visual art a sense of composition and balance in two dimensions, how shapes and colors relate to each other. How does that relate to how we orchestrate something in music or develop a musical idea? And I think of a similar thing in terms of encouraging students to study film or theater, that you get a chance to understand, not just I like the story, but what is the nature of the story? How does it unfold? How do the characters develop over time? That these things can give us a more vivid and alive understanding of how to articulate what we're hearing in our own music or in the music that we really love.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Professor Arkadi Serper is teaching right now, but I asked him and he sent me his answers for the questions. And I would like to maybe not read all of it from the beginning to the end, because it's right there on the slide, but maybe we can summarize what's on his answer. I think the most important thing is at the end, we need to teach the craft. That's what Arkadi says, and the craft will become our inspiration, and that's how all of us have been taught. And all the theory subjects, all this core immersing experience or immersing study, we need to apply to, to tap into the mind of young composers. And yes, starting from very basic skills, going into really in-depth, trying to dig up what was in the mind of composer, and that might that might be in counterpoint or in a nice duet with the new composer mind, and we can start by imitating, but then departing on our own journey. That's what Mr. Serper wants to say. Now we can go into into the second question of our discussion. And well, it's 8:17. Maybe in this time I will ask anyone who is willing to share the thoughts instead of going round by round. Really would like David Garner to start. I know how.
Thank you, Alla. Well, it's a peculiar question. The ideas of repetition and variation, texture, timbre, vocal phrase structure, they're not specific to diverse cultural backgrounds. There's a universality in music itself that transcends what we have labeled diversity or cultural diversity. There are many, many, many more intersections than divergencies. And so when I work with people, I've had several rather now well-known Persian composers study with me. Several Japanese composers study with me who are very, very interested in their own indigenous styles and ways of writing music. But in investigating what they want to write, it's all music. And for me to show them the similarities between what we call the Western canon and what they're used to hearing in extended ornamental melody, for example, for the Persian composers, or rather stark pointillistic timbres and textures for the Japanese. There's no diversity in that instance. We hear these gestures in all walks of concert music and all walks of popular music, regardless of the culture. So I find that teaching Western compositional styles to budding composers of different cultural backgrounds without inhibiting that which makes their voices unique and valuable, you don't teach them any differently than anybody else. So I may have misunderstood the question, but I've taught many, many people from different cultures, and I don't really see a disparity in what I teach them with what I teach anybody else. And I'll shut up now.
Thank you very much, David. Well, Mr. Arkadi Serper, I think I understand. I mean, he sent me his answer, and it briefly goes down the history when composers of Mighty Five were first proclaiming that no one should have a formal German education, and then they split because Rimsky-Korsakov decided to do it. Decided to learn more about Western tradition, not only Russian folk style. Well, the music history put everything on its place, and well, there's music. It's all about it. So that's what Arkady said. I would really like to hear David Conte's opinion on that.
My students know I quote Nadia Boulanger constantly, but she said exactly what Professor Garner said, that there are matters of technique that transcend style and taste. There are matters of technique that transcend style and taste. Style meaning what kind of music you're writing, what country you're from, what your background is. Taste, what you like or don't like. I always say it's like training a composer if they were an architect to build a building that won't fall down. And I think that one of the big challenges, because we live in a multicultural society, is that the balance of breadth and depth. And what we have is a lot of breadth and sometimes ignoring of what is depth. So I'll just give one vivid example. A student could say, oh, I listened to 20 new pieces this week that I didn't know from all over the world. Great. That's breadth. A student could say, I memorized a Bach 2-part invention, and then I worked so that I could sing one part while playing the other part and reverse my hands. That's depth. So Kierkegaard said, purity of heart is the will to desire one thing. I think wherever our students are from, we want to inculcate in them a hunger for imitating mastery, whatever we think that is, rather than worrying about seeking for singularity and individuality, which in any case can hardly be sought out because it can hardly be avoided if you have it. And if you don't have it, there's no one that can give it to you. It can't be taught. So I think that people who come to the conservatory are obviously interested in the tradition of the West, and we are open to other traditions, of course, and we teach jazz now and we teach many things. But I think it's important not to pretend that if we want to cultivate depth of expression from people, that there must be time for true assimilation of something. And it's very easy in this culture, because everything is constantly available all the time, to think that, well, you're expanding yourself because you're familiar with so many things from so many different cultures. But in fact, Conrad Susse used to say, don't be an ignorant know-it-all. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Yes, Taurin. Again,
Yeah, I mean, I
it
think
is so diverse.
The onus, I feel, is really on us to bring in these other styles of music that perhaps have been left outside of the canon for many years, especially, when we talk about diversifying the audience for classical music. I think that there's so many opportunities. I get David's point about diving deeply into some masterworks, and that's totally important. But I think there's certain composers and artists that can be brought into the classroom that will give some students maybe a clearer line in which they can see themselves and their own musical background. So as far as kind of opening up the curriculum a bit to bring in students and then take them along this journey to explore those masterworks, I think that's kind of an approach that I'd like to see.
Thank you very much, Taurin. Ellie.
Yes, I would like to relate something that happened when I was in Shanghai giving master classes to high school age young composers. I was asked through a translator, I was asked whether they would be allowed to write, as they put it, Chinese music if they came to the conservatory. And I said, you would not be forbidden. Of course, you want to use music from your own experience and your own culture to help you express yourself. But you need to have it also be your individual music. That is, don't just simply directly quote things, but then also we would have you study other composers from your culture who did assimilate styles, such as, Bright Sheng and Chen Yi and so on, a kind of reverse Orientalism. And of course, as Arkadi mentioned, Bartok, how to use he demonstrated how to use the music of his own culture and background within so-called Western practices. I don't think that in this time, music education in general is restricted solely to Western. I mean, with the emergence of ethnomusicology and so on in education systems, there is a great deal more diversity encouraged. And that's about as far as I can take that question. I think that it should be no holds barred.
Well, thank you very much, Ellie. And well, we are about to discuss the third question, and I would like to ask our panelists if you know, the second can definitely be merged with the third one, because it probably can. So if Joe Stillwell will continue his thoughts on the question number 3.
I'd be happy to. I know I kind of jumped the gun there earlier and kind of answered that ahead of time. No, it's all right. I see there was a question in the chat and about pattern structures and pattern learning in AI and music cognition. So actually, I think if I can connect a little bit, try to connect that to give an answer for that question. I think about this a lot in teaching some of my younger private students and teaching my composition workshop class of in music, we're constantly dealing with patterns. And there's this question of knowing when you can repeat, how long you can repeat something, and then when you need to change it, and whether you need to alter a musical idea itself in some way so that what comes next is evolving out of that, versus when you need to completely change your musical idea, completely change the tone, the texture, and everything. And again, I think we can relate this to classical pieces from that tradition, but I'm always constantly trying to encourage composers. This connects to every genre you could possibly imagine, and so that's something I think that is really implicit in how I try to tease out from any piece that we study or look at. When is it time to keep a pattern? When is it time to change a pattern? How can you vary it? How can you alter it in a way that relates to the greater whole and gives you, again, a kind of sum of the parts, gives you a narrative and a story and an overall arc at the end of what you've done. And to also connect that to music theory and musicianship training, I've been noticing recently with teaching sight singing to students who are just beginning that they struggle with certain things in isolation, like trying to sing a tonic triad followed by a dominant triad. But if you just give them a familiar pattern that they might have heard before, they'll be able to sing that very, very easily. So there's this matter of trying to take something familiar and connect it to a kind of deeper understanding of what's going on. So I think that's where I'll leave my answer.
Thank you very much, Joe. Daniel Wood, because you're dealing with that constantly.
Well, it's very interesting trying to teach composition to a student that is still learning their timetables. I mean, we have in the pre-college so many students that are very young that have yet to learn so much information. So we're in a great spot because these young composers are just extraordinary sponges, and they get exposed to all sorts of different types of things within the humanities, and then they incorporate it into their music so quickly and so effortlessly. And I think as much as we can as teachers to make sure that all of our students are continuing to think in very broad terms when they approach their music, I think that's going to yield very great output. Anytime we, I think, get too much into the weeds about exactly how we compose and what we're doing, and we lose sight of all the humanities, all the structures that help kind of bolster up our particular discipline, then the students will lose out. And so it's vital for us as faculty within the pre-college to make sure that our young students are taking a very wide approach to their disciplines and learning as much as they can all the other humanities, just as Stillwell was talking about in looking at like a work of visual art, and how does that move you, and what do you see there, and how can you apply that to the music that you're writing. So
thank you very much, Daniel. And I know that Mauricio expressed the desire to have his input.
Well, I was just mentioning before this idea of really taking into consideration what are the interests of the students beyond music. And when you're asking what are other fields that might be part of their compositional adventures, I mean, pretty much I would say nowadays, everything is pretty much welcome, right? So we have this more and more this multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary approach to music, to art, to life, that the only thing that we can do nowadays is just to support, that broad view on art, life, science, music, and to welcome those different interests to build up a broader compositional mind.
Thank you. I have the answer from Mr. Serper, and he mentioned, among others, he mentioned the theater as the great experience for the composers to broaden their horizons and experience all active, interacting nature of music. Ellie, what would you tell? I mean, it is going to be a concluding remarks, so we're wrapping up over time, but we'll try to do it quickly.
I would suggest that at a more advanced level, say beyond the preparatory level, and up even into the graduate level, that students can be guided to the study of, or have suggested to them, the study of such related sciences as acoustics, or even neurology. At least have them read a couple of works by Oliver Sacks on the relationship of neurology to music, how we hear, how we listen, and how we experience things auditorily. And whether you want to call it a science or not, of course, I think psychology is very applicable. And beyond that, of course, the other artistic disciplines, and certainly, as Arkadi said, theater.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Taurin.
We have students that, as Mauricio recommended, are looking at coding. For composers, I think music production is a valuable skill. Engineering and acoustics and recording can always help. I mean, the life of a film composer, somebody who's composing video game nowadays, involves the entire workflow from composing on a computer, being a music librarian, and then also doing the recording and the engineering, the mixing, the mastering yourself. Currently, in one of my classes, we're using climate data. We're working with climate scientists from Berkeley Lab, which gives students a kind of an outlook on not just working with data as a source to inspire their musical composition, but also learning about climate science, which is a very, very valid and important, relevant topic to maybe create some works of art around. So there's so many ways to kind of guide our students, kind of looking at the most important issues of today and seeing how they might reflect on those as artists.
Thank you very much, Taurin. Maybe David Garner can continue.
So what we're discussing now is the future. Is that what's going on, Alla?
Yeah, the last question. What do you think is necessary?
Oh, that's a very easy one. Very easy one for me to answer. Very easy. Everything. As you know, I'm an autodidact myself. I come from a very, very diverse background. And I find that no matter what discipline I'm engaged in at the current time, there is music and music to be heard and had and understood within it. I don't like to seem glib, but I think that music is everything. And so the kinds of, you don't actually need to go any further than Dr. Tymoczko's book on the geometry of music to see exactly what I'm talking about. It does not matter what you perceive in the world or what discipline you're in. If you are a composer and you're a musician, you will learn from it. So I could go on and on about there being nothing, the beyond art is nonsensical in itself. But I would encourage my students, and do encourage my students, to soak up everything and anything they can in their experience. To be a composer is to communicate the human experience cathartically to other humans. And it does not matter what discipline or what aspect of humanity we gather that information and experience from.
Thank you. Yeah, it reminds me of Anna Akhmatova saying that nobody knows what can generate a great piece of a poetry. Well, probably it is for the great piece of music. Jacques, what do you think?
What can we say after that? I think we're all influenced by everything that we're exposed to. History, math. Xenakis is impossible without math. Webern, its particular pointillistic style, is impossible without the advances in sciences at the beginning of the 20th century when they were discovering the atom. I mean, sometimes they're correlations, but not so much, you know. Surrealism and Milhaud, Elinor will echo to that because he was her teacher. And I encourage students to soak it in, sponge everything that they can get their hands on. And I also caution them not to let the extra musical influence supersede their artifact. There's some politically inspired works that sometimes they're being praised not because of the artistic value, but because of the cause that they advocate. So composers must make sure that in the end, it's the artifact that matters, not the cause. So we remember Beethoven's Third Symphony because it's the Third Symphony, not because he scratched the dedication to Napoleon, right? So there's the socio-political background, but the artifact remains.
Thank you very much, Jacques. I don't know if Mason is with us because he had like very interesting situation with a tree. Oh, thank you, Mason. So Mason, and we have David Conte, and then we have Mr. Jonas Wright to finish.
I'm sorry, I have a tree coming down on my back property. It's a little chaotic to wake up and see
piece of music.
Yeah. Well, I actually majored in English literature when I was at Columbia and Juilliard, and have always found that some kind of parallel study in drama and in narrative, particularly, is really good for composers. So, for example, a lot of the music that I've written, even in a purely symphonic space, has had a dramatic or a narrative element to it. Pieces like Alternative Energy, which kind of tell this story of energy over the centuries, or a piece called Art of War. They kind of integrate electronic sounds from actual, military, or in this case, like energy installations. And I would never have been able to create that kind of almost like programmatic type of a symphony without having studied literature and studied playwriting back when I was a student of Arnold Weinstein and Kenneth Koch at Columbia. So I've found that encouraging your students to look particularly into narrative and drama is really, really useful. And sometimes that allows you to have new windows into some of the great music of the past, such as Berlioz or Wagner or Liszt, these composers that were animated by narrative forms. So I've personally not been the greatest mind in the world of science, but I do appreciate what Jacques was saying about mathematics. And to be totally honest, even in my world, that has impacted me in terms of acoustics and electronic sounds. There's definitely an element of kind of science and STEM study that goes behind that. So I absolutely agree that you have to, complement what you're learning as a composer with elements of real life.
Thank you very much. David Conte.
Yes, I would say that an interesting question that we haven't touched on yet that relates to this is it's valuable to find out from a student what I would call touchstone experiences are, meaning powerful experiences they've had with works, specifically starting with music, but meaning where they were deeply moved or something that really impacted them. And then to help them understand, if they don't know already, that they can have those kinds of touchstone experiences with other forms of artistic expression, particularly the other, what we would call time arts, meaning like theater, film, even poetry, which exists, are words, one word after another in order that hang in the air and have a certain narrative arc. And so that there's a certain, I went to some trouble at one point, and I could share it with anyone who's interested, to define what a masterpiece is. I wrote out my definition of it, but one feature of it was that it demands, or it inspires in the participant, the listener, the viewer, a sense of, it represents a concentration of thought and feeling that exists in its own, you might say, ontological time, not chronological time. You're actually taken outside of time. I've had this experience with films, with opera, with plays, and certainly even with long poems. That one of my hobbies is to memorize poetry. And so I think it's possible to share with the student that there are profound artistic, spiritual experiences to be had through contact with works of art. And of course, music is at the center for them if they're musicians. And that's a very valuable thing to explore, which ends up bringing in these other disciplines. And then lastly, one would say, when you work with text, which composers, of course, in the history of music, the history from Gregorian chant through the beginning of the rise of instrumental music is based on text, mostly liturgical texts in the West. And so we know that everything comes from words and from language, the sound, what makes Debussy sound French and Janáček Czech and Copland American and Vaughan Williams English and Bartók Hungarian. They managed to express the very soul of their country and their people. And this is still something that I think is very much alive in people's cultural experiences.
Oh, that's fantastic thought. Well, they're not kicking us out, but it's time for us to continue our work teaching teaching composers of tomorrow. Harry, are there any questions?
Thanks for a very intriguing set of ideas. I wanted to ask something I didn't hear much, and it's a bit of a bugbear for me, the role of emotion in music. And I wanted to ask you the degree to which you think emotion, and particularly experiencing emotion and then expressing it through music, plays a role in composition. Because I'm personally a Hans Lickian, so I think it's the sort of musical idea rather than music as a language of emotions. But I know I've seen that there's a lot of controversy among that idea, particularly for composers. So I was wondering if you guys could give me a sense of how much of a role that plays in your teaching or your students' compositions, et cetera.
Oh, that's a great question.
Could I try a bit of an answer for that? I'm sorry I neglected to actually bring up emotion in terms of kind of describing how I try to encourage students to use imagery, narrative, those things outside of music itself. Is a big part of that for me is so that they have a vocabulary, a way of developing, a way of articulating in language musical experiences, many of which are going to be emotional, but that I don't want it to end with just, oh, that makes me feel happy or that makes me feel sad, but that it gets to the depth of why might a person be experiencing this kind of depth of pathos at this moment, or why might, can you create a vignette around a person experiencing elation depending on the nature of a piece. So that's, it's actually very foundational to at least the way I think of this in my own teaching.
I would like to respond to that too. I think that the two approaches that you describe, one emotional and the other, shall we say, more abstract, are both, they're opposite ends of the same spectrum. And it varies from student to student which part of that spectrum you want to explore with them or they want to explore with you. I think that they should learn how to travel along that spectrum freely as they develop what will be known as their own style.
Well, thank you very much, Ellie. And since we have to part, I would like our Dean Jonas Wright to have a closing remark. But before he says, I want to thank the Wild World Music Conference for inspiring us to have that roundtable conversation, and also to underline that the composers of tomorrow are in very, very, very good hands. Jonas, please.
Thank you, Alla. Yeah, I do want to say thank you to the Worldwide Music Conference for hosting us. Thank you to you, Alla, for organizing this group together. Thank you to everybody who joined us for the conversation, and to the world-class faculty that is at SFCM on the pre-college and the collegiate level. To see so many of you come out for this conversation today is really great. So thank you to all, and thank you to Harry for co-moderating as well.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And sorry we ran over time, but we couldn't stop. We could not stop till the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.